might well be aware, we're now going to move on to English literature. So again, it's the same with English language. You have two papers. So paper one is your Shakespeare and the 19th century novel paper. You have to analyze a given extract and compare it to the text as a whole, picking one question from section A, which is your Shakespeare, and then one question from section B, which is your 19th century novel. And then you have your paper two, which is the modern text and poetry paper. So again, you have to write an essay on a text from section A, which is one that you've studied. So it'll be modern prose or drama. Then you have to write a comparative essay on a poem that you have studied and another one that you are given in section B from either what is it called? It's the power and conflict poetry or the love poetry. I think that's what it was. And then in section C, you have to analyze an unseen poem. So before we go on to talk about essay structure, let's have a little look at the mark scheme again, because it is so important to understand how you are being marked. So again, it's the same for paper one and paper two. So you don't need to think about changing your process between papers. So very similarly, you have AO1 to AO4 this time though. So AO1, again, is all about your ability to write a cohesive essay, to be able to have used quotes and textual analysis to read, understand, and respond to the texts. AO2, very similarly to English language, is all about analysis, your ability to analyze what the writer has done to create meaning and effect. AO3, which is different from English language, this is all about context. So this is about relating the given texts and the context in which they were written. So it's a really good rule of thumb always to think about the fact that a text cannot be, it can't really be separated from the context in which it was written or in which it is set. So if you think about an example, like Jane Eyre, for example, would have been very different if it had been written, if it hadn't been written in, early 19th century England and it was written by an American housewife in the 50s. Like, it would be a completely different novel. So anytime you're writing an essay in English literature, you should always have a sentence or two which refers back to the socio-historical context of the text. When I say socio-historical, I basically mean the social and historical. So thinking about religion at the time, what kind of infrastructure was there to do with, like, what kind of laws were in place? Was there much political stability? Were there what were attitudes towards women like? What were attitudes towards gender roles like? What kind of, was there a specific political landscape at the time? Thinking about all of this can inform your understanding of the text more. And often in a case, your sentence about the socio-historical context can literally be something along the lines of the fact that this, whatever quote you've analysed gives you an insight into the socio-historical context. So it gives you as the reader, as the modern reader, an insight. Always think about yourself as the modern reader. And then finally, AO4 is all about how you've written it again. So it's kind of like AO5 and AO6 for the English language, but it's all about grammar, vocabulary, punctuation, spelling. So, have you used a semicolon in the right way? Have you actually explained things in an intellectual way using critical vocabulary? So AO4 is only used to assess section A of each paper, whilst the other three are used throughout. And as you can see in this second box, you can have, so again, this is why I would suggest looking at the marking scheme, because I've only got levels 6 and level 5 here, but basically you get marked on answers from level 1 to level 6, 1 being the lowest, 6 being the highest. So as you can see, level 6 is a convincing critical analysis and exploration. It would get you something in the region of 26 to 30 marks per essay. Level 5 is 21 to 25, and so on and so forth. So in the column to the column to the right hand side, it actually gives you like what at the top level your answer would be in level 6, and at the bottom level of level 6 what your answer would be. So most of the time, a bottom level answer for level 3, 4, 5 upwards will be just a little bit higher than the previous level. So in this case, a bottom level, I'm going to stop saying level because there's too many levels and it's confusing me, so I feel like it must be confusing you. The bottom criteria for a level 5, for a level 6 answer is just above a level 5. So in this case, starting to demonstrate the aspects that you would associate with levels mark scheme. So, if we look at a level 6 answer, it's likely to be critical, exploratory, well-structured. It is a conceptualized approach to the task with a range of references. It's got insightful analysis of the methods, supported by judicious use of subject terminology. So again, getting in your terminology, your literary devices, and it explores one or more ideas, perspective, contextual factors, interpretations. So again, I would always have a look at the mark scheme, see what you're being asked to do, see how you can, based on like, if you've had any mocks or anything, think about what you could be doing to further your analysis, to further your marks. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail now, because I think it would be really good before we dive into the papers to talk about essay writing, woohoo! Because often, and I know that I've found it in this way, sometimes you can just be slipping marks just because you haven't quite structured your essays in the correct way. So I thought it would be good to spend a bit of time on that. So your structure is so important. We don't want wishy-washy, unclear arguments. We want a really clear structure. And for anyone who is mathematically inclined, which is not myself, but even this helps me, think about it in the left-hand column here. Your introduction should be 1/10 of your essay, your main body should be 8/10, and your conclusion should be 1/10. So think about your introduction and your conclusion as like, you could either think about them as bookends, or you could think about them as, you could think about it as a sandwich, and you could think about them as 2 slices of bread, and the main portion of the sandwich is your main paragraphs. This is where you're going to do your analysis. Whenever you're writing an essay, always start with a question. Your question is always your first port of call. You have to understand your question, you have to deconstruct it. So always think about, what is the question actually asking you to do? Are there any specific instructions? Are there keywords? So again, very similar to your English language paper, go through and make sure that you understand exactly what the question is asking for you, or asking of you rather. So for this example, this is a question all to do with A Christmas Carol. So I picked out, it's starting with this extract: explore how Dickens presents the suffering of the poor in A Christmas Carol. Write about how Dickens presents the suffering of the poor in this extract, how Dickens presents the suffering of the poor in the novel as a whole. So I have highlighted the words that are really significant for this question. So how, because it's asking you to think about, what does Dickens do? What techniques does he use? And again, what effect does this have on the reader? Thinking about quotes that you can pick that support your argument. I will probably say this numerous times, but never, English literature is not about your ability to regurgitate quotes and to show that you've learnt reams and reams of quotes. Always be judicious with choosing which quotes you're going to pick, and it must always support your argument. Don't throw in a quote willy-nilly. So going back onto this, the suffering of the poor. Sorry, one second. The suffering of the poor, it references a specific group of people in a specific circumstance, so it asks you to think about them. And also by kind of categorizing them as the poor, you automatically create those who are not poor, so the rich. So you can maybe talk about that. And then finally, again, because your questions are often very clear in GCSE, it tells you to talk about it in the extract and in the novel as a whole. So it signals to you that you do need to be thinking about where else in the novel Dickens presents the suffering of the poor and how he does that in that portion as well. So after you have read your question and you know you understand it, you should then move on to your plan. if you go away with anything, please go away with this. Do not ever start writing your essay until you have a plan. You can do that. However, it just means that you might become a bit lost and you might jumble your ideas up. And these plans, as you will see, these plans do not have to be extensive. They do not have to take you too long. They can literally be the smallest, quickest plan, but it can be so vital at keeping you on point and keeping you on task. So in your plan, you should pick what your paragraphs are going to be, but you should also think about your line of argument. Now, I think when I've given this talk before, I think you guys refer to it as like your thesis statement. So whenever I mention a line of argument here, I will try to refer to it as a thesis statement as well. So your thesis statement is the golden thread which runs through your entire essay. It should start in your introduction, go all the way through, and finish in your conclusion. It basically outlines what you're going to argue for the examiner, and it's something that will keep you on task as well. You will probably have had this when you come out of mocks and everything before, where you'll say, oh, I talked about this in the essay, and your friend will say, oh, well, I talked about this, I didn't talk about that. However you interpret your text is so valid. However you interpret your text is valid. As long as you can back up your argument with evidence, then you go for it. You don't have to write the exact same thing as someone. You could argue for a completely different point. But just make sure that whatever you are arguing, you back it up with evidence. So for example, this is a plan that I would write for the previous question about Dickens' suffering, Dickens' portrayal of the suffering of the poor. So my introduction, I've chosen that my line of argument is going to be that I will argue Dickens' extensive depiction of the suffering of the poor encourages sympathy from the reader in an attempt to confront them with the inequities of Victorian society. So I've kind of related it to the socio-historical context, and I've not even got onto my main paragraphs yet. So that signals to the examiner that I'm thinking about the context, I'm thinking about the relevance of the context. I'm also thinking about my role as the reader, and arguing that through the suffering of the poor, the reader is encouraged to have sympathy and to think about the inequities of society. So when it comes to this question, which I think is your paper one, which is your Shakespeare in your 19th century, both times you'll be asked to talk about the extract and the novel as a whole. So in this case, for that paper, I would just say keep it really simple. You can do a first paragraph on the extract and use 3 quotes, and then your second paragraph would be on the rest of the book and use 3 quotes, and then again come to your conclusion. So to put this into practice, because I know that you'll quite possibly have studied a multitude of different texts, as I found out when I first tried to do this with a group. So I would just like you to pick a text that you are studying and then think about one of its main themes. I would then like you to write a small plan. Even if you don't get a small plan written, I would like you to come up with a line of argument or a thesis statement for an essay. So your question will be explore the theme of blank in blank. So these are just some examples. If you've studied any of these texts, feel free to do those ones. Explore how the lives of women are presented in An Inspector Calls. Explore how ambition is presented in Macbeth. Explore how loneliness is presented in Frankenstein. So again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. So it's 6 minutes past. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Have I still got that enabled in the chat? Possibly. No, I don't. I'll enable it now. Write me a line of argument or write me a small plan. Think about how best you could structure your essay to talk about any of the themes that you pick. So yes, I will give you, oh, no, go back. I'll give you 5 minutes. So I will turn off my camera and my microphone and stop pestering you if I can get it up. But yeah, continue to write and then just pop it in the chat and we will go through it. Okay, we'll go with one more minute. So just start popping some ideas in the chat, and I will go over something that I've written as well. Okie dokie, fab. So yeah, continue to write whatever you're writing, pop it in the chat, and we will discuss. But I decided to go with the question about explore how ambition is presented in Macbeth, just because it's a text that I know very, very well. So my line of argument for this was that I will argue that Shakespeare presents ambition as a destructive force, portraying the potentially catastrophic consequences as a warning to his audience. So I've made a very clear point. I'm saying that ambition is presented as a destructive force, and I've talked about the consequences and what that effect is for the audience, talking about the fact that it is a warning. So my potential structure would be in paragraph 1, I would talk about Macbeth. I think I would talk about how at first he rejects his own ambition, which shows that he is trying to trying to maintain a level head. He's trying to be happy with his circumstances. However, I would then have a quote about how he accepts it and how he kind of revels in his ambition. And then I would have a quote about his death and the fact that his ambition is his hamartia, his deadly, his fatal flaw, and about how this leads to his death through his kind of crazed, power-hungry attitude that unfolds throughout the play. And then in paragraph 2, I think I would talk about Lady Macbeth, about how she is very different. She completely accepts her ambition straight away. I would probably pick a quote from her "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts" speech to show that she accepts the ambition. But then I would show that she, once she's kind of achieved what she wants to, she tries to leave it at that, and then she regrets her ambition because of what happens and how ultimately her ambition drives her mad. And then a quote for death. So that's how I would structure that. So let's have a look at what people have said. Okay, so this is for Inspector Calls. So yes, so Sheila is infantilized. Yeah, wonderful, brilliant. Taught to value material, and she's controlled by those around her. Yeah, brilliant. Paragraph 2 would be on Eva. Pretty. So yeah, women are only valued for their looks. And then Sybil, her class is higher. She married lower. Women led lives below men socially. Yeah, brilliant. That would all be fab. That sounds like a really good structure. And then Macbeth, Shakespeare presents the theme of ambition as acting like a weapon throughout the play, as it can corrupt someone and lead to a permanent state of guilt and a tragic fate. Brilliant. It destroys the characters. And again, yeah, literally it becomes his hamartia, which leads to his downfall. Brilliant. Social responsibility in an Inspector Calls. Yep. Golden thread. I think J.B. Priestley presents social responsibility as a moral duty that everyone should uphold. Brilliant. Ooh, I've lost it. Where did we go? Showing how other people's actions affect each other. So paragraph 1, Sheila and how she reacts. Paragraph 2, Mr. Burling. Yeah, brilliant. That all sounds really good. Romeo and Juliet, violence is presented through the deep conflict between Montagues and the Capulets, as well as how it perpetuates everyday life in Verona. Brilliant. Oh, perpetrates, but yeah, it's similar. Very good. And then Inspector Calls again, Sheila, how she starts as naive and innocent. Yes, comes to her senses. Mr. Burling not wanting to accept responsibility. And yes, capitalism. Wonderful. Yeah. So exactly, you can see how hopefully in a very short space of time, 5 minutes, you can establish the sort of framework that you're going to want to have for your essay. And it means that you have a structure that you can look back on for reference. Fabulous. So now let's go into all of this in a bit more detail. So your introduction, as is evident in the word, your introduction is where you should be introducing your argument. You should signpost the shape of your argument, highlight any major debates, kind of signpost what your central argument is going to be, and have your thesis statement at the end. So this is a structure that I think I used at school and then was also retaught it at uni during my English degree. So this is a topic, scope, structure, thesis. So you can think about it as TSST. So topic, it's kind of all of these structures I'm going to give you are basically just more fleshed out versions of PEA. So topic obviously stands for your topic sentence. It's a sentence or two about the essay's main significance. So for example, you might say texts which explore blank allow the audience to reflect more upon blank. So again, yeah, you're just making you're making your initial point. First S stands for scope, so it's a sentence or two which signals what focused element of the larger topic you're going to talk about, highlight any major debates. And then the second S, structure. So this is basically where you signpost what you may be expecting to talk about in the essay. So basically just breaks down what your paragraphs might be. So it kind of gives the examiner a sense of what to expect. So again, you could be thinking about different themes or characters or the before or after of an event. And then your thesis statement, T. So yeah, your line of argument, your thesis statement. Oh, excuse me. My throat is going, that's fun. So this is an example of an introduction that I wrote in my fourth year of uni, third year. It was a module in Victorian literature. So my essay question is an exploration into how the self is concealed in the works of Oscar Wilde. So, am I going to read this out? No, I'm not going to read it out. But you can see, I'll read sections of it. So I make my point. I say that this quote from the book, and I'll say which book, encapsulates one of the major anxieties of his time, understanding humanity. It's my topic sentence. It indicates what this essay is going to be about, humanity, understanding it. I then have my scope. So I go on to explain that a little bit more. I talk about the fact that the 19th century was a time of great upheaval, new philosophies and sciences which threatened the sensibilities and beliefs of its society. I talk about what they are, like things like Darwinism and Freudianism. They were important because they undermined binaries of good and evil, and how Victorian literature then became a device through which writers could explore the limits of the human conditions. So again, I've got my scope. I've just like zoomed the microscope in on the topic a little bit more, I suppose. I then have my structure, so I kind of signpost that fact I'm going to talk about it in Dorian Gray, and then I'm also going to talk about it in another text. And I say that both cases explore how an individual may hide their true self. And then in blue, I have my thesis statement, my line of argument, where I say that I'm going to argue that through the presentation of the title characters and their actions, how and why the self is concealed can be analysed, allowing for a deepened understanding of both the morality and anxieties of Victorian society. So again, I always would try and make sure that there is some sort of reference to historical context in your thesis statement, in your introduction in general, because it means that you will automatically start to hit that AO3 assessment objective. It can be the thing that you kind of forget about. So just make sure you're doing it in your introduction just means that you've ticked that box already in some capacity. So moving on from your introduction, we now get into the main crux of the essay. So these paragraphs are where you will pick your quotes, where you will analyze them. You'll explain why they're important, what they do for you as a reader, what they tell you about the book, what they tell you about the socio-historical context, and then link it back to your line of argument. So a typical structure for a main paragraph, this is something that I would highly recommend. You go T, which stands for your topic sentence again. You have E, which is elaboration. So it's just a sentence or two which elaborates on your topic sentence. You then have your evidence or your quote. So picking that. You then have your analysis of that quote, and then you link it back, you tie a little bow around it, and you say, here you go, that was my main paragraph. So as you can see, it's kind of just a more, as I say, a more fleshed out version of PEA, but this time it's TEEAL. So we will have a look at how that would work. There we go. So going back to our Dickens question about the suffering of the poor, this is a little paragraph I wrote quite quickly. So I have my topic sentence within the given extract. Dickens presents the suffering of the poor through the allegory of the young boy and girl, ignorance and want. That is my topic sentence. I say that I'm going to be talking about the allegory. I then expand upon it. I elaborate on it by saying, through this allegory, Dickens confronts his reader with the realities of poverty within his society and how it affects those suffering. So as you can see, I've elaborated. I've just done a tiny little sentence. I kind of think about your elaboration as basically the linking sentence which gets you from your topic sentence to your quote, so that you're not just going, this is what I'm going to talk about, here's a quote. It's something that is kind of like a stepping stone to that. I then pick the quote that he depicts the children as animals, that they are wolfish. My analysis then goes on to talk about the image of the wolf conjuring associations with primal aggressive behavior and the fact that this takes away the humanity of the children. Then my final sentence, linking it all back, demonstrating the impact that poverty may have on individuals, robbing them of sensibilities associated with the moral purity so valued by Victorian society, and thereby effectively evoking sympathy from the reader. So as you can remember, my line of argument was all about how Dickens presents it to elicit sympathy from the reader. So yeah, brilliant. I hope that shows you how, literally, I think I use that's what, five, 6 sentences, and I've done all of the things. So hopefully that shows you. Now, I'm definitely not going to read this out, but hopefully this can show you how you would use TEEAL in a larger paragraph where you kind of have the same point, but you use multiple references. So again, this is a paragraph from my wild essay at university. And again, because you're GCSE level, you don't need to be going into anything as much as this detail. I just thought it would be helpful because it shows how you can use it multiple times within one paragraph. Because it's always good to kind of show that you're not just going, right, here's my quote, here's my analysis, here's a different part of the novel and quote, here's my analysis. Being able to link and show that you understand the journey in a text and how things change or don't change is a really helpful tool. So you can see I make a point about my topic sentence is about the fact that from an earlier text to a later text, Wilde's paradoxes expand. I talk about what those paradoxes might be. I give an example of the fact that Dorian's fiance only exists in performativity. I then analyze it, saying that she herself is a paradox, and then I bring in another point, another topic sentence about the fact that this then leads to her untimely death. And then I link all of that back at the end in the blue by saying that by basically summarizing the importance of all of that and what it tells you about the way that the self is concealed and what that does for the socio-historical context and what that does for you as the reader. My final sentence is the one about the modern reader. So I say that this allows modern readers an insight into the strict morals of Wilde's time and to understand the way in which this literature utilized contemporary philosophies and challenged ideologies. Contemporary in this context, meaning of his time. So again, yeah, you don't need to be doing anything as complex as this, but hopefully it shows you how TEEAL can work. So then finally you have made your main crux, and it might sound a bit silly, but you do need to make sure that you answer the question in a conclusion. You should think about I know I've said to think about them as pieces of bread, but also think about your introduction and your conclusion as sort of mirrors to each other. If you've written a really strong introduction, your conclusion should, and follow that through with strong paragraphs, your conclusion should be quite easy. It's not a place for new evidence. I would always, if you come up with a really good idea as you are writing your conclusion, sadly, it's probably not the best time to put it in, because you don't want to confuse your marker. You don't want to make a point that you're not going to be able to analyze fully. That might just it might just impact your marks negatively. So if you have that light bulb moment, just put it to the side and finish your conclusion. And if you think you can slot it in somewhere else in your essay, then go back to it then. But for a structure for your conclusion, always think about assessing your line of argument. That's the important thing. So this would be the structure. It would be link, evaluate, and relevance. So link it back to your line of argument, evaluate what you've written and sum it up, and then sum up the relevance of your argument. The examiners always want to see critical thinking and awareness of the context. So again, it's something to bring into your conclusions as well. So this is my conclusion, again, from the Oscar Wilde essay. So I say, to conclude, the works of Oscar Wilde provide an insight into how Victorian literature engaged with and explored contemporary philosophies. Both Lord Arthur Savile's Crime and The Picture of Dorian Gray combine the morality and anxieties of the era to demonstrate the complex nature of the human condition. Through Wilde's presentation of his title characters and their actions, which is basically exactly what I said in my introduction, the extent to which one may conceal one's true self from the world is revealed, hiding the sordid and immoral truth which threatened the values of Victorian society. So I've basically summed up concisely what I talked about in my essay. And then finally, the relevance, I say, ultimately the texts encourage the modern reader to examine the connection between morality and socio-historical context, allowing for a deepened understanding of the time period and how literature sometimes challenged its preconceptions. So again, I'm really talking about the relevance, why this kind of study and why this essay is important, because it gets you to think about the connection of morality and different historical contexts. It gives the reader an insight into what the morality of the text's socio-historical context was and relating it to your own. So yeah, I think when I wrote this essay, when it was annotated, I think it was literally just like, excellent conclusion. So as you can see, it's a really easy formula to follow again. You link it back to your line of argument, you evaluate, and then you sum up your relevance. And that is that basically for your introduction, your main paragraphs, and your conclusion. So we're going to have another 5-minute break just before we get on to actually talking about the English language, English literature papers. So sorry, I keep doing that. If you can come back at 25 to, but I will put a timer on the screen, and then we will get going into English literature just before we break for lunch. Okie dokie. Right. So we will get going again. This will be our last little bit. Yeah, maybe like 20, 25 minutes before we break for lunch at 1. So we'll see how much we get through. But yes, we're going to move on to, oh, if I can, there we go. We're going to move on to the actual papers for English literature. So your paper 1 is, as we talked about, the Shakespeare and the 19th century novel. So it's asking you to write an essay making reference and analysis to the extract that they provide for you. So I thought we should start off with a few little tips about what techniques to be looking out for in the extracts, just because sometimes you get really lucky and it's pardon me, sometimes you get really lucky and it's an extract that you are really familiar with. It's one that you've seen come up before. Sometimes it can be a completely, it can be a kind of slightly unexpected section of the text. So it's good to think about what kind of literary, oh, sorry, I've got something in my eye, what kind of different literary techniques you can be analysing. So with regards to Shakespeare, one of the biggest things that you should always be thinking about with regards to Shakespeare is rhythm and rhyme. So rhythm, I'm sure you will have heard your teachers talk many times about iambic pentameter. So it's the dee-dum, 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 dee-dum. Iambic pentameter, you have 10 syllables, da-dum, dee-dum, yes, 10 syllables in a line, and every second syllable is stressed. It echoes a heartbeat, something to really recognize. And it's also the stress landing on the second syllable or the second word, the second beat, I suppose. Sometimes that means that, well, every time it means that a word is being stressed. So sometimes it's really good to think about where does the stress land? Is that indicating that you should be paying more attention to a specific word? And if so, what does that word tell you? Is there a word that you think should have been stressed and it isn't? And then also thinking about are any lines uneven? Sometimes Shakespeare likes to do like dum de dum de dum de dum de dum de dum. And that will be onto the second line. So what does that show you? Why is he placing emphasis on that? Why isn't it all regular? Start to think about why that might be. And then with rhyme, sometimes in Shakespeare, more so in the poetry, but sometimes in the play, there is a regular rhyme scheme. Sometimes there isn't. If there is a rhyme scheme, how regular is it and what effect does it have? What words are being rhymed and what emphasis does that suggest? What are you being directed to as an audience member? And yeah, think about, is there irregular rhyme? Or has there been a very consistent rhyme scheme, and then all of a sudden there is a completely unrhyming couplet, and it throws you off? Why might that be? So yeah, rhythm and rhyme are some of the really important things to think about with regards to Shakespeare. And about verse and prose. Now, some people, when I've done this talk before, have heard of verse and prose. Some people haven't, so I thought we should go over it. So verse is poetry. Verse is poetry which contains a rhyme, and it's often used by characters who are more elevated in their status. So a character like a king or a prince or a duke. It's often used for formal speeches, important declarations, examples of really high emotion. So for example, an example of verse in a text that you might study is in Romeo and Juliet. Romeo's speech, can I do this? If I profane with my unworthy hand, break this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this. My lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. its example, that, you know, that's a prime example of verse. There's regular rhyme scheme. It's iambic pentameter. It's being used by Romeo to declare his love for Juliet, to really have an emotive impact on her. So that's why he might be using something like verse, and they kind of copy each other. It becomes a sort of poetic dance that they do, echoing each other and playing with each other and playing with the different poetic techniques that they both throw at each other. It becomes a really, really interesting literary thing to talk about. So in contrast to verse, you have prose. So prose is your everyday language. It doesn't have a set rhythm. Ooh, sorry, bang my hand. It doesn't have a set rhythm. It's often used by characters who are lower class or lower status. It's also used for casual conversations. So an example of prose would be in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Character like Bottom, or like some of the other mechanicals, they will often speak in prose. So like when Bottom first wakes up from his dream, he talks about he just calls all, he goes, Snout the Tinker, gosh my life, stolen hence and left me asleep, da 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 da. So yeah, it kind of emphasizes his lower status within the play. It's also really intriguing generally to think about when characters switch from verse to prose. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes characters of a lower status can switch to verse to seem more eloquent. There's a really interesting example of it in King Lear, when Goneril and Regan, who are two of Lear's daughters, have been professing their love. They're talking in verse. They're trying to like smooth him over. They're trying to elicit a response from him. And then when he leaves, they stop talking in verse and they start speaking in prose, and it's much more truthful. It really shows their true natures. So yeah, it can be really interesting to think about verse versus prose. Other techniques you can think about with Shakespeare, your general language devices, thinking about the imagery, so any similes, any metaphors. Has he used personification? Shakespeare likes his personification, so most of the time you can probably find one at least in each extract. Are there any exclamations? Are they asking questions? Think about who, if it's a kind of monologue or a speech, who is the character talking to? So it's different. Well, in general, who are they talking to if it's a piece of dialogue? But it's also really interesting. So say it's like Hamlet's soliloquy, or say it's I think the piece that the extract that I've got in a little while is a speech from Juliet where she's talking to her nurse. How does the intended audience change how the character speaks? Can be something really interesting to analyze as well. Thinking about language, thinking about repetition, antithesis. When you're looking at Shakespeare, always think about Shakespeare writing for an audience, and how that impacts things, because you know, whether it's plays or whether it's poetry, it's written to be performed, it's written to be heard rather than read. And so there may be more kind of sound devices, things that will sound better when they're spoken. So things like onomatopoeia, things like repetition, sibilants, assonance, you know, devices that will have an impact on the sound that comes from the actor's mouth. So think about that. Then when we flip to the 19th century novel, it's a lot of the literary devices will be the same, you know, your similes, your metaphors, exclamation. This is a place to think about the structure though as well. A lot of the time in 19th century novels, your sentences are very long. They love a semicolon in the 19th century. So when that is challenged in some way, when the writer makes a break from that structure, what effect does that have on you, the reader? What does it tell you about what's happening? Does it shift the tone? Does it shift the journey? A lot of the time, you might get an extract as well that is dialogue. So again, thinking about who is there a, you know, is there a power imbalance? Who's talking to whom? Does someone are we hearing from someone? This goes on to the next point. So whether it's first person or third person, are we hearing directly from a character who is talking about themselves, talking from their perspective, or is it the writer presenting two characters or more than two characters? And what effect does that have? Do we feel more invested if we have a first person narrator? But also then, can you be sure that it is what's the word? Unreliable narrator. Can you be certain that it is a reliable narrator? Think about punctuation. Again, if you go to if you're doing practice papers or anything, I would always suggest like looking at an extract. You could probably do it if you're reading a book at the minute. You could probably just have a look at page on the book and underline techniques. It's really important to start to get in a mindset, and I'm sure you probably already are, actually, to get in the mindset of being able to look at a page and go, right, what techniques is the writer doing, and being able to identify them. Again, in the summary notes and the text guides, it like gives you examples of what different techniques are and goes into it in a lot more detail than I just have. But yeah, get used to thinking about what techniques are at play. So you open up your paper one, you find the text that you've studied, and you go to that question. So again, my suggestion would be read through the summary. You always do get a slight summary. So I've got something in my way here, but I know that it says at this point in the play, Juliet reacts to the news. I think it's the news that Romeo has killed her cousin Tybalt, and so has been banished. Sorry, I got really close to the camera there. So I would always read the summary, make sure that you understand what's going on, then read the extract, then read the question, and then I would say read the extract again. And this is where you can underline or highlight anything that sticks out to you. When it's paper one, pardon me, and you're being asked to think about analysing in comparison to elsewhere in the text, I would always, as soon as you have picked out certain aspects from the extract, I would have a little space on your paper where you note down any quotes from elsewhere in the text that you think are going to be useful to you. Just so that you've got them all, in a few lines. It can be tiny little writing, just so long as you have your quotes from elsewhere in the text written down, so that you know that is there for you. So this is an example question. So it says, starting with this speech, explore how Shakespeare presents Juliet's feelings towards Romeo in Romeo and Juliet. Write about how Shakespeare presents Juliet's feelings towards Romeo in this speech. And then again, how Shakespeare presents Juliet's feelings towards Romeo in the play as a whole. So, looking at this extract, obviously you can see that I have broken up again into little sections. I've underlined a lot. I'm going to open up the chat function again because I would love to see what you all pick out, what you think I have underlined means, what the techniques are, if you can find any of the techniques. So if we start with ah, poor my lord, or something like thy 3 hours wife, villain didst kill my cousin, that villain cousin would have killed my husband. Foolish tears, all this comfort, but oh, it presses to my memory. Banished, 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 hath slain 10,000 Tybalts. Thy father or thy mother, nay, or both. Father, mother, Tybalt, Romeo, Juliet, all slain, all dead. If you can just throw out some of the techniques that are popping out to you, that would be really great, and then we can discuss what the effects of that would be. Again, if Romeo and Juliet isn't a text that you are necessarily studying, this is still good to get you used to identifying different literary techniques. So if we went to ah, poor my lord, what technique do you think you could analyze in that? Or any others, just pop them in the chat. Ah, poor my lord. What does that do? Or something else. Thy 3 hours wife. That's an interesting one. I always like that one. I did this speech for an audition once, and it's a great speech to analyze. So if we think about like ah, poor my lord, Oh, excuse me, I'm going to have a little sip. Think about "Ah, poor my lord." The sounding of the "ah" is kind of an exclamation. "Ah" and "oh" are very similar in that respect. The "ah, poor my lord." Depending on your accent, it will probably be some form of is that assonance, or yeah, something where you are the repetition of the vowel sounds demonstrates a kind of a woe, an emotional investment. She's "Ah, poor my lord." It brings you down. It shows how emotional she's feeling about this. "Thy 3 hours wife" is a very interesting thing to call yourself. Thy 3 hours wife. The word choice there, in one level, what's the word? It emphasizes how shortly, like how quick their marriage has been, and how soon after their marriage all of this action has taken place, and how quickly her life has been turned upside down. But "thy 3 hours wife," she's referencing the fact that she is his wife, which suggests that she should be standing by him. But obviously he's killed her cousin, so it's not as simple as that. Um, your foolish tears. She is rebuking her own tears. She's trying to understand in this extract how she feels about Romeo. Oops, go back. The repetition of "banished," and the fact that, like damned guilty deeds, like in that sentence, the accent on "banished" adds an extra syllable, and it adds an extra emphasis onto the word. So when it's repeated as well as emphasized, you really get how important that word is to her, how this one word has, as she said, has slain 10,000 Tybalts, the hyperbole of the 10,000 Tybalts. Pardon me, it emphasizes just how devastating this is to her. It really shows how she is trying to grapple with what's going on. Go back. Why followed not when she said, "Tybalt's dead, thy father or thy mother, nay, or both?" Trying to come to grips with it. The list here to speak that word is father, mother, Tybalt, Romeo, Juliet, all slain, all dead. She's listing every single person in her life. She's again making a kind of hyperbole. She's making an example of how devastating this news is, and this one word, how it has really impacted her. All slain, all dead. The kind of the monosyllabic nature of that line, how it's just all slain, all dead, the repetition of all. Yeah, so again, thinking about what techniques you can be bringing up when you are analyzing an extract is all really important. So going on to think about how you would go about writing a plan for this kind of question. Again, picking out the important aspects from the question. You're obviously asked to talk about Juliet's feelings towards Romeo in the speech, and then in the play as a whole. So I've decided that I'm going to argue in this essay. I'm going to argue that through a variety of techniques, Shakespeare demonstrates Juliet's feelings for Romeo as all-encompassing, examining how love can overpower reason and the consequences this can bring about. So again, as I talked about when we were looking at how you write your essays, I would stick to a structure that was examining your first paragraph being about the extract, and then the second paragraph looking at the text as a whole. So for this extract, I have picked up on the banished, the repetition of the banished, what that tells you about the intensity of her feelings, the fact that her feelings towards Romeo through this quote show that she is devastated by his banishment from Verona. Then the fact that she is speaking to her nurse, she's constantly asking questions, indicates that she is confused, indicates that she is using this conversation to try and work out how she feels. So again, in relation to her feelings towards Romeo, it shows that she's probably very confused about how she feels. Again, you could use, if you wanted to talk about her confusion, you could use the section but wherefore villain didst thou kill my cousin? That villain cousin would have killed my husband. The juxtaposition of that, the kind of paradox in those two lines is shows her confusion. And then the exclamations of the ah and the oh and the whoa, again, they very much elicit a certain sound. They suggest her emotional investment and her grieving almost, and her mourning of what their relationship was and how it's going to be different from now on. And then in paragraph 2, I have tried to stick to similar aspects. So how Shakespeare shows repetition, in fact, to show that she is trying to be she's trying to think logically about their relationship. So when they first meet, she says it's too rash, too unadvised. So in this instance, it's showing that she's much more level-headed. I would then probably choose another example of powerful emotive language to show the to show the extent to her all-encompassing love for Romeo. And then I would probably pick a quote to end with that was from their death scene, to show how Shakespeare is suggesting that this kind of love can be deadly. It can overpower reason. It can, and what that tells the reader is that is it a warning to the reader? Is it yeah, well, it probably is a warning to the reader, warning the reader of giving in to all-encompassing love. So that would be my sort of essay plan for something like section A for your Shakespeare. I'm just having a think. I think we might break for lunch now, and then we'll go on to, because we're not going to get the 19th century one done in 5 minutes. So we're going to have a half-hour lunch now. So I will get the timer going, but we'll probably start back just a few minutes before 1:30, and then we will go on talk about section B for paper 1, which is the 19th century novel. Then we'll go on and we'll do paper 2, which is the modern texts, the poetry, and then we will round up with some general tips for exam taking, for your revision. So please feel free, if you think of any questions during lunch, pop it in the Q&A, because we'll probably leave probably leave about half an hour for any questions. So again, if you want me to go over anything, if you want me to talk about, if you have any Shakespeare questions, any English language questions, just pop them in there. But yes, lovely. So I'll see you again just before about 1:30. So yeah, enjoy your Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you all had a lunch. I have lost count of how many cups of tea. So let's get cracking with the final portion of this seminar. So as I say, we will probably have about half an hour at the end for any questions that you have. So please, please, please use the Q&A function. Even if it's just any generic questions about taking exams, if it's about a specific text that you're studying, about how to revise, just any questions in general, please pop them in and I will do my best to answer them. So we looked at Section A of the first paper for English literature for your Shakespeare and 19th century novel. We looked at the Shakespeare section. So let's try that again. Let's move on to the 19th century section. So again, you will get given an extract. I would suggest following the same structure that I talked about before, where you read the summary. So like for this example, it's a very quick summary. The creature asks Frankenstein to create a companion for him. Easy, tells you exactly what is going to be going on in the extract. So have a read, then have a read of the extract. As you can see again, I've underlined or like bracketed anything that sticks out to me. You go and you read the question. So for this one, I think it's talks about loneliness. I think that's the question that you're then asked to do. So again, I think the chat function might still be open. Let me double check. Yes. So yeah, if this time you could pop into the chat what techniques or anything that stands out to you here. So like for example, maybe let's start with I am malicious because I am miserable. Could someone please tell me what technique that might be or how you might go about analyzing that? Doesn't have to be a detailed sentence, just if you have any idea, please pop it into the chat. I am malicious because I am miserable. What does that suggest to you? Alliteration, yeah. Sorry, excuse me. Fabulous, yeah, alliteration. It's very alliterative. I am what is it? I am malicious because I am miserable. You could say that the M sound is emphasized. Malicious because I am miserable. They're also, I would say that you could also probably analyze that in terms of juxtaposition as well. Malicious because he is miserable. He uses two contrasting adjectives to describe himself. Just as well. No, you wouldn't use just as so too here, but he is malicious. Someone who is malicious is it has connotations of evil and a negativity, but that negativity is also exacerbated in his misery. Being miserable suggests that he is very upset. He doesn't live a happy life. So it tells you about the character. It tells you what is going on in the character's life. What about Sorry, I'm making just humming along. Shall I respect man when he contemns me? What would that be? I think we've seen that come up before. Shall I respect man when he contempts me? It was something that we talked about in relation to the persuasive essay topic. Only way he knows how to express his emotions as a monster. Exactly. Yeah, brilliant. So that question, what technique would that be? Shall I respect man when he contempts me? This technique pops up quite a lot through the extract, so it would be a really good thing to be able to analyze. If anyone knows what that is, it was when we were doing. It's one of the words in a forest. If anyone remembers what that was. Rhetorical question. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Yes, rhetorical question. He asks his creator a lot of rhetorical questions in a persuasive way in order to get Frankenstein to question how he has behaved and to question how miserable his life has become because of Frankenstein's rejection of him, really. And he's doing this in a way to elicit pity. What else shall we do? I will revenge my injuries. How would you analyze that word revenge? What does revenge tell you about the character? Yeah, what would you say for revenge? I know it's word choice, but what would you say for revenge? What would something you would analyze be? Think about what it tells you of his character, of his what might happen if he uses the word revenge, what it tells you about his intention. What does it tell you about that? If anyone has any ideas. That's quite sick. I would say that with his word choice of revenge, it really signals his vendetta against, yeah, backs up his malicious behavior. That's exactly it. It's consistent with what we know about him, because he is malicious. It signals that he is willing to perpetrate vengeful acts upon Frankenstein because of everything that's happened. So it's almost a warning to Frankenstein by saying that he will wreak revenge. It warns Frankenstein and it warns the audience that aspects of Frankenstein's life may begin to fall apart because of his revenge. What about the image of Frankenstein as his arch enemy? Again, that's probably along the same lines as revenge. It's very much it villainizes Frankenstein. The word choice of arch enemy, it connotes this distance between them. It connotes a rivalry, which is almost kind of deadly. And again, suggests that not Frankenstein, it suggests that the creature views Frankenstein in a very negative light, which makes the idea of his revenge even more at the forefront, really. Frankenstein then goes on to talk. Okay, so at the end, how would you analyze the last? That's one sentence technically. How do you analyze the last two sentences from "Oh, my creator, make me happy. Let me feel gratitude towards you for one benefit. Let me see that I excite the sympathy of some existing thing. Do not deny me my request." How would you go about analyzing something within those two last sentences? You've got the exclamation marks. You've got some existing thing. You could analyze that. Do not deny me my request. How would you analyze that? Because that is the final part of the extract. So it's there to make an impression, I would say. Any thoughts about that? What about the O? The O is very simple, but it's very effective. It tells the reader a lot about how the creature is feeling. Anybody else have any ideas? I know we've been on here for a while and everyone's probably like, we've just had lunch. Any thoughts come to mind about the O, my creator, make me happy? What kind of emotional response does it conjure from you individually? Let's maybe stop thinking about like, what does it mean? Just think how do you read that? Because again, it's all about your individual interpretation. His perspective develops and changes. Yeah, he's I'd say it's a very tactical decision, but it also probably tactical in a subconscious way, because he says, "Oh, my creator, make me happy." It's almost begging to an aspect of Frankenstein's humanity, which the monster himself really wants to have. He wants to have a companion to assuage his loneliness. And he's seen that through his warnings and through his emotive language, when it's focused in a violent way, it's not given him any sort of joy with Frankenstein in that way. It's not getting any sort of positive response from Frankenstein. So instead, he's trying to appeal to his creator's humanity. He's trying to use more. It is really sad. I know. Well, it's fair that you're not doing this text again. I think it's just good to be able to recognize what it does to you. And yeah, it is really sad. It really emphasizes, the exclamations emphasize his desperate need for companionship and his desperate plea to not be lonely anymore. It's really sad. I would, again, if you're not studying this, I would highly recommend reading it. I studied it at uni in my first year, I think, and it's not a long book, but it is heartbreaking, and throws up some really interesting questions. So yeah, but again, that's very good to think about analyzing different techniques. So again, with this section, this is how I would roughly plan an essay. So starting with this extract, explore how Shelley presents the effects of loneliness and isolation in Frankenstein. Write about how Shelley presents the effects of loneliness and isolation, both in the extract and then in the novel as a whole. So I've decided that in this essay, I'm going to argue that Shelley explores the devastating effects of loneliness and isolation in order to encourage the reader's sympathy for the creature. So again, I would stick to the same structure, have one paragraph for the extract, have a second paragraph for the rest of the novel. So from the extract, I have picked things like the arch enemy, the impassioned language of dreams of bliss, and yeah, again, the exclamations. Thinking about that in later in the novel, how else you could talk about loneliness, how Shelley presents loneliness and isolation and the effects of this. I think it's also good to consider, because it is such a it is a text which is primarily concerned with like the battle between two characters. I think it's also really important to recognize Frankenstein's loneliness, how Victor's work often ends up in him being isolated from other people because of his obsession with his work, and because he kind of, almost in humanizing the creature, he dehumanizes himself because he removes himself from society. So you could talk about that. I think I would have a quote about the effect that community has on the creature when he is with the De Lacy family. It's when he really starts to learn about being human, when he really starts to learn the benefits of community and camaraderie. I would then have a quote which would talk about the violent effects of loneliness and isolation when community and company is stripped from you. So I would talk about the murder of Frankenstein's younger brother William and show the violence of that. And also a point which is good to make, 1 second, is not to forget how important setting can be. Setting can often be used by writers to juxtapose, it can be used to support, it can be used to symbolize. So in Frankenstein, setting plays a really important part in presenting effects of loneliness and isolation. The setting often mirrors the isolation. There are a lot of, pardon me, really desolate landscapes, really extreme landscapes, such as the Arctic, such as the Alps. They have a really intense confrontation on I think it's Mont Blanc. So yeah, talk about how setting can influence your understanding of the text as well. Yeah, brilliant. Again, if you have any questions about paper 1, pop them in the chat. Oh, this is an example. But this is not to do with loneliness. This is to do with grief, so it's a different question. But again, you can see how TEEAL is at work here, talking about using repetition to emphasize the extent of something. how that, using an elaborative sentence to link that between the quote, my love, my wife, so lately living so dear, so worthy. The repetition highlights the inextricable link between the two, whilst so demonstrates the admiration he had for her qualities. By drawing attention to Frankenstein's affection and adoration for Elizabeth, Shelley deepens the reader's understanding of his feelings for her, thereby evoking sympathy as he mourns his beloved wife and presenting the overwhelming nature of grief. So yes, I think this one was all about grief in the text. So again, it's just how you see that you can use TEAL within your structure to be able to get to be able to hit the higher level of answers, which will get you the higher marks in the marking scheme. Lovely. So moving on to paper 2. It's the exact same mark scheme as we talked about before. So just continue to do exactly what you're doing using PEA or TEAL. Use those structures that we've talked about, continue to provide in-depth, critical analysis. I know that I sometimes, again, the exams were structured slightly different in Scotland, but knowing that there was going to be an unseen poem to analyze can sometimes make you a little bit nervous. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. As you guys have shown, you're very good at picking up on techniques, both in English literature and English language. So you just continue to do what you're doing and you'll be absolutely grand. So 1 second. Oh, my throat's not doing well. So for section A, this is your modern text. So it's either prose book or it is a play. So it's very similar to section 1. However, you get given a question to choose from. Pick which question you feel like you can write more about. I would say I would recommend not picking the question that you know is within a part of the novel that you understand more. Always pick the question that you feel you can provide the best in-depth analysis for. If you can't remember as many quotes, that's okay. Again, you're not getting marked on your ability to remember quotes. So if you're looking at these two questions and you're trying to decide which one, and you can remember 6 quotes for one but you can only remember 3 for the other, or that's a bad example. Say you can remember like 10 quotes for one and 5 for the other, always go for the 5 that you think you can analyze in a lot of depth, because then your analysis will be stronger in the long run. So let's look at this example again. I've chosen an Inspector Calls just because it's the text that I'm writing the text guide on at the minute, so it's very in my mind. Thought it would be good to go over. So again, you will get a question worded something along the lines of, how does Priestley present what life is like for women in An Inspector Calls? Write about what life is shown to be like for women in the play and how Priestley presents what life is like for women in the play. So again, use your time to make an in-depth plan. For this example, I have chosen that my argument is going to be that Priestley presents the women in the play as being at the mercy of men, regardless of their class, in an attempt to highlight the gender inequalities of Edwardian society to the audience. Again, when you're talking about a play, always make reference to the audience. Think about how different it would be to watch the action unfold rather than reading it. And for this example, I'll split it into 3 paragraphs because again, paper 2, you're not being asked to talk about an extract. It's just discuss this within the context of the whole text. So I've gone with 3 paragraphs to talk about the 3 main women in An Inspector Calls: Sheila, Sybil, Mrs. Burling, and Eva Smith. So for Sheila, I would pick a quote. I think somebody put this in the comments actually, and it was quite similar to what I've got here. So for Sheila, I would have a quote which shows how her parents and Gerald treat her. So that her mother is often saying, "Don't be childish, Sheila," or referring to her as a child. She kind of infantilizes her. It diminishes her importance. And then she is the character with the most growth in the play. She is mostly aware of what is happening. So yeah, a quote to show how she begins to break down those barriers. For paragraph 2, I would talk about how Mrs. Burling is treated by her husband, and then also talk about how she presents herself. There's a lot within, if any of you are studying in spectacles, you can really talk about a lot of internalized misogyny within Mrs. Burling because of how she interacts with and ultimately is very cruel to Eva Smith, how she rejects her plea for help from the women's charity. You can talk about the internalized misogyny and again relating it to the context of the fact that, you know, women in the Edwardian period and arguably nowadays, we become very conditioned to accept that views about women who live certain lives are immoral, and how those views are just stoic and they're unarguable. So yeah, you could talk about internalized misogyny with Mrs. Burling. And then final paragraph, Eva Smith, I would talk about how she is a working class woman and how that is slightly different to the other two characters, talking about the jobs that she has to take, the fact that she has to go to others for help. And then I would end with a quote about collective responsibility, because that is the kind of overarching message, and it's kind of irregardless of gender and sex. It's calling for equality amongst everyone in society, and exposes the inequities of the play's historical context. So again, a little example just to show you another way that TEAL can be used. So I've talked about, I'm going to make my point, is about several gender stereotypes, such as the supposed frailty and sensitivity of women. That is my point. My elaboration, I talk about Gerald's desire for Sheila to leave the room during his interrogation, and then use the quote, it's bound to be unpleasant and disturbing. It's met with disdain from the inspector, who asks, and you think young women ought to be protected against unpleasant and disturbing things? So again, through this repetition of unpleasant and disturbing, Priestley draws attention to the deeply shocking nature of Eva Smith's death as something that went undiscussed in Edwardian times due to the illegality of suicide. So again, I'm relating it to the socio-historical context. I'm getting that assessment objective 3 tick, at least partially. Then linking it back to my line of argument by saying this demonstrates that Gerald views these conversations as too harsh for women to be involved in, thereby conveying to the audience how women were shielded and prohibited from engaging with the realities of their own society. So again, just another example of TEAL in practice. Now, moving on to section B, the poetry. Woo! I've often found that you either love poetry or you hate it, but that's okay. We'll go through it in a lot of detail. So for the poetry, you are asked to write an essay on studied poems, one of which you are given as an extract. And then for section C, you have the unseen. So people often think about, I've had this question before where it's like, how do I write a poetry essay versus a prose essay? And the answer is, it's basically exactly the same. Poetry is just ever so slightly different in the fact, again, like a play, it is made to be heard. So a lot of it comes out through the sounds. But in reality, how you go about analysing it, its importance, its effect on you as the reader, and what it tells you is exactly the same as what we've been looking at. So your poems in section B, they're separated into thematic categories. So you pick which one you've done, and then you begin to analyse. So I thought, again, it would be good to go over some poetic techniques because they do differ slightly from prose and plays. So the one of the big things to think about with poetic techniques is if the genre or the structure informs informs your understanding of the text. So sometimes thinking about the genre that it's written in, is it a dramatic monologue like what's it called? My Last Duchess. That's a dramatic monologue. Or is it a ballad? Is it a sonnet? A sonnet being the love poem, which has a very recognizable structure. Whatever, if it is a recognizable genre, does it adhere to all of the rules that you'd necessarily associate with that? You know, a ballad tends to have a specific rhyme scheme. Does it adhere to that rhyme scheme? An ode is often a poem which expresses deep longing or love for something. It's literally in aid of an ode. Does it do that properly? Does it not? Thinking about the genre and how that informs your understanding of the piece. And then, yeah, again, with structure and form, is there a rhyme scheme? Is it regular? Is it irregular? Does it, does it keep popping up and down? Is it present and then absent? With the rhythm, is there a constant rhythm? Is it something like a sonnet in iambic pentameter, or is it in a different kind of rhythm? Are there couplets? Is there repetition? Is it like a specific, is it a 3 stanzas and each stanza has 4 lines? What does the structure of the poem tell you? Does it create order? Does it create chaos? And then also sometimes in enjambment, I never know how to pronounce that word. Enjambment, it's when the lines basically like run over. So it's not, Freddie went to the woods. He started to run. That would be 2 sentences with full stops at the end. Enjambment would be Freddie went to the woods and started to run. You see a lot of modern poets doing that nowadays. A lot of modern poets use enjambment for one reason or another. Again, thinking about your imagery, your literary techniques, are there, poets use a lot of metaphors and similes. Is there an analogy that's being used? Is there hyperbole? Poetry is a lot about symbolism. What kind of symbolism is there? Is there personification? And then again, the really important aspect for me, at least, when I'm reading or hearing poetry, is the sound, because again, it has been created to be spoken. It has been created to be listened to. Pardon me. So is there alliteration? Is there assonance? Is there onomatopoeia? Thinking about all of the different techniques that can be used in a poem, and then going on and analysing them in exactly the same way that you have been analysing everything else. So instead of giving you another example answer, I thought it would be good to have a look at the mark scheme. And it's very handy because I have the poem right here. So this question is from the Power and Conflict section. Talk about compare how poets present the effects of power in My Last Duchess and in one other poem from Power and Conflict. So you obviously have to talk about My Last Duchess. It will be the extract that you are given, and then one other poem. So it's another poem that you pick. So this example, it breaks it down into the different assessment objectives. So obviously 3 often tends to be a lot shorter because it talks about context. So have you included any ideas about the morality of leadership? Has there been an exploration of views of those in power? The negative corruptive view of power. AO2, the analysis of different types of imagery, contrasting imagery, sublime imagery, possible treatment of structural or formal elements, such as the fact that it's so if you were to comment on the fact that it is a dramatic monologue, and you were to analyze that, you would get a mark within the AO2 bracket. And then with AO1, talking about the comparison of different types of power. So again, this is more to do with how you would, what exactly you're talking about, what you're choosing to analyze. So any treatment of the effects of power, a valid comparison of political power to repress or control or influence societal groups. And I can bet you that I'm not going to be able to find it now. There probably is a key. My last Duchess. Just might be good to hold this up actually while we're talking about it. Yeah, you can find it. I did open it. Yeah, we were. I opened it on this paper page earlier. So I can't see myself, but I'm going to assume that you can see me. Obviously, this goes into a lot of detail. There's themes of ownership, death, and foreshadowing, objectification, superiority, key ideas over here. So powerful versus the powerless. You could talk about that. You could talk a bit about gender roles as well in relation to power and conflict, and how there is a power, an inherent power imbalance at the time. Yeah, there's lots of parenthetical, like parentheses. What else have we got? The pronoun, hypocrisy, and faux humility, resentment, tone of aristocratic pride. Thinking about the tone is really important when it comes to poetry, because more often than not in poetry, it's not always the case, but more often than not, you will have a narrator. And so again, it's like listening to someone's inner thoughts. So what is it telling you about your narrator? What kind of tone are they creating through their choice of language? And what impact does that have on you as the reader? So again, yeah, this is another good reason to have a look at past papers, because it'll show you the kind of things you could be analysing, and how you can be achieving those top marks. So, oh, excuse me. This is, I can't quite see, this is still, yes, compare how poets present relationships between parents and children in For You Are Mine and one other poem. So yes, you have power and conflict and love and relationships. Does anyone, can anyone pick out a good technique that you could analyze in this poem? Just give it a very quick read over. Anything. You don't even have to be able to analyze it. Just throw me something that you think stands out to you. I've already spotted a couple. My favorite word is being used in this poem. The one that I can't pronounce. There's quite a few. Yeah, just if you have any thoughts, pop them into the chat. If I can make sure that I can see it. There we go. I appreciate you might not be doing this poem, so if it takes you a second, then that's absolutely fine. I'll start to have a look through and a talk anyway. So the Marilyn line is completely as a monosyllabic word. It is literally well, it's not monosyllabic. Well done, Sarah. It's a single word. It breaks up the sentence structure, which has been established previously. There is no rhyme scheme that I can see. There might be internal rhyme, but there is certainly not rhyme scheme at the end of the lines. So it doesn't create any sort of rhythm. There is a rhetorical question, which shows you that the writer is speaking to someone. Excuse me. The cha-cha-cha, it stands out. It's italicized and it's marked with an exclamation point. So again, yeah, it's really standing out. Clear as scent under the tree with its lights. The use of the caesuras, the commas, the punctuation within the lines of the poem, that gives you something as well. It's not as we talked about, a line that stops and then another line that starts underneath it. Yeah, just thought it would be good to have a look at that, and we could I've talked a little bit about different things that you could look into there. But finally, moving on to section C, which is the excuse me, which is the unseen poetry. So you get 2 questions in this section. So for question 1, you answer the question about the given unseen poem, and then for question 2, you have to answer the question comparing 2 unseen poems. So again, would recommend just using the exact same system. Read it through, make sure that you understand what's going on. Annotate the poem, annotate anything that stands out to you, any techniques that you recognize, so that you've got a physical reference. Pardon me. Excuse me. So since we've done this before, we won't go into the first question, but it's worth noting the difference in the marks. So question 1, it focuses on one poem, and it's worth 24 marks. So it needs to be a fleshed out essay with lots of references and lots of analytical thought. Whereas question 2 is worth 8 marks. So again, you're looking to make a kind of comparison, which is maybe like comparing 2 or 3 things and analyzing those in more detail. So I think this is a possible structure that you could use for question 2. So I've said that in paragraph 1, I'm going to talk about the fact that both texts use metaphors, and in poem 1, the metaphors are used to show how love is good. However, in poem 2, the metaphors are used to show that love is bad. And then I would debate whether one is more effective or one or less effective. And then in paragraph 2, I'm going to talk about how both of them use enjambment, and say that poem 1 uses enjambment to show how excited the speaker is, whereas poem 2 uses it to show how sad the speaker is. So to go into enjambment before, because I think someone in a previous seminar asked me, what do you mean by this example, excited versus sad? And it's because depending on the other language that's being used, the excitement carries through the line and it continues on to the next line. That's how enjambment could be shown to use excitement. There could be quite a fast-paced nature to it, with the choice of language, with the choice of words. However, it could be sad because it could be a lot slower in rhythm. It could be a lot more negative in the description, and instead of breaking up that sadness, it just continues from line to line to line to line. Could be something along those lines, something like that. And again, I thought it would be good to show you what the mark scheme would look like for this. So what are the similarities and or differences between the methods the poets use to present these feelings? So again, that's why I would, if there are any methods that are used in both, I would analyze them, because then you can compare which one you find to be more effective. So for a level 1 answer, you get 1 to 2 marks, and it's very simple, and you are only really identifying what methods are being used. And it's a very simple connection. Levels 2, you have a clear comparison. You're commenting with the effects of the methods used to create meanings. Level 3, you're thoughtful in your comparison of the poems. You're using a clear comparison of the effects of writers' methods to create meanings. And then finally, up to level 4, which is your highest end marks, you are critical, you're insightful in your comparison. It's an analytical comparison of the effects of the writer's methods to create meanings. So again, using PEA probably in this instance, because it's worth 8 marks, you don't need to be going into a lot more detail. Whereas, like I say, with question 1, you're focusing on one poem, and it's worth 24 marks. So you would probably want to use PEAL in question 1 in section C, and PEA in question 2 of section C. Excuse me. So this is an example essay, and as you can see, this is using PEA, and then there's like a little L, peel, there's a little L linking it back to question there as well. Sorry. So in this question, It is in both yours and scaffolding, speakers describe their feelings about the strength of romantic relationships, what are the similarities and or differences between the methods the poets use to present these feelings. So I have I make my point. I say that in both poems, the writers use rhyming and non-rhyming couplets in order to explore the strength of romantic relationships. In scaffolding, Heaney uses rhyming couplets for each of the 8 lines, ending with "Never fear, we may let the scaffolds fall, confident that we have built our wall." In contrast to this, Hoffmann's couplets are non-rhyming throughout, with the only example of rhyme being in lines 5 and 8. "Without you, I'd be an unleafed tree. What is an island without the sea?" Whilst Heaney's use of rhyming couplets creates a lyrical atmosphere to the poem, and therefore the consistency of his, therefore emphasizes the consistency of his affections, reminiscent of romantic sonic poetry, Hoffmann's use of this rhyme draws attention to these specific lines in order to emphasize his feelings of loss without his love. This demonstrates that, whilst poets use couplets in different ways, both effectively emphasize to the reader the differing ways that romantic love can be felt and experienced. So as I say, like a lot of the time, you can show that one is more effective. If you think that one use of the same technique is more effective, then that's completely fair. You can argue that you found that to be the case. However, you can say that both are equally as effective, as long as you show that you have critically engaged with the analysis of both of those. You can come to this conclusion.